Good evening and welcome to We the People, brought to you by the League of Women Voters of Minneapolis. My name is Joan Higinbotham and I'll be your host for this evening's program. One statistic that really surprised me when I heard it is that in Minnesota, the arrest rate is more than twice the national average for people of color versus white people. And when you think of our population, that's quite shocking. So tonight we're going to talk a little bit about what is called racial disparity in the criminal justice system, what is happening now, and some ideas that we have for improving the system or at least diminishing that disparity that we have here in our state. Our guests this evening are Mark Haase, and Mark is from the Council on Crime and Justice, and our other guest is Larry Lucio, and Larry is a former school principal at Stadium View School in Minneapolis. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you. Thank you. Glad to be here.
So this racial disparity thing, so disparity is the difference in the arrest or in anything between the people of color in our state and the white people. Is that right?
And it's a disparity based on their percentage of the population. So it's you know, for example, use the example of over twice at the juvenile level. It's actually much higher than that. You know, and take that all the way to the prison population. Minnesota's prison population is about 35% people of African Americans, whereas the population of African Americans in Minnesota is 5%. And those disparities, actually, as you say, are actually even greater at the arrest level.
And so this is even worse among the juveniles?
Yes, absolutely. Approximately 8 out of 10 kids that are in the juvenile detention center are African American.
8 out of 10 children who are arrested or youth would be people of color. Mm-hmm. And that's way out of whack with the number of people, the population.
Yes, very much so.
So what causes this to happen?
Well, that's a big question.
That is the $1,000 million question, isn't it?
So it's a number of things. It's the laws that we choose to create. For example, in drug sentencing, you may have heard of the powder cocaine versus crack cocaine disparity that's been at the national level. Until recently, if you possess the same amount of powder cocaine and crack cocaine, you would get you'd have to have 10 times the amount of powder cocaine to get the same amount as 100 times the amount of powder cocaine as crack cocaine to get the same sentence. And crack cocaine is it has the same effect essentially, but it's a cheaper drug, and it became an urban drug. And when you look at urban populations, there's more poverty, and because of other factors, more communities of color there. So same drug, greatly different sentences. That's a law difference. The other one of the other factors is how we choose to enforce those laws, where the police are located, how they arrest people, the way that some of the crimes occur in urban areas. They're more out in the open, more of a police presence, and so that drives those communities more into the criminal justice system. And then even deeper than that, it gets more complex when you look at, why there are certain communities that are more likely to be living in poverty, living in urban areas, the disparities in education, the disparities in employment. We've heard about those and it all. So there's this whole system of disparities that, and sometimes it's talked about as the school to prison pipeline.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you about. 8 to 10 just seems like an incredible. 8 out of 10 kids who are in jail are people of color. Mm-hmm. And is it the same kinds of things?
Well, I think you have to look at the fact that we continue to education, as I've said many times, reflects the political atmosphere in our country, and we continue to talk about middle class, and we never talk about poor anymore. And many of the young people that are in our school, have come through our school, would be perceived as poverty of poor. And again, the schools continue to, I think, generally try to continue to teach those kids. They're unsuccessful, but yet it's that continuation of a square peg in a round hole. It doesn't work. And again, we have these little phrases, we want you back, all kids can learn. But I think we're primarily looking and emphasizing and focusing on middle-class kids, and our poor kids are not being responded to or appropriately being educated.
And I think, too often, and more increasingly over the years, the way we've responded to some of those issues is through the criminal justice system, versus better schools, more access to education and employment, and when there's issues also of substance abuse or mental health issues, there's a knee-jerk reaction in our society to if we can't solve it other ways, let's have the police show up and take care of it. And then that creates that pipeline, and it also actually becomes a cycle. The school to prison pipeline is, I think, a good metaphor, but it's incomplete because it really becomes a cycle.
It's a circular thing.
Yeah, because then these youth develop a criminal history through the criminal justice response. Then they may end up incarcerated as adults, and then their children their parents are unable to vote, unable to get housing, employment, and then it just creates a cycle of poverty and potentially interaction with the criminal justice system.
And so the schools, what I hear you saying, Larry, are really not set up to deal with kids who have issues, so to speak.
I think there's the thought out there that alternative programs and charter schools are serving these students, and it's not. Again, we're continuing to educate and trying to instruct in ways that have proven unsuccessful for many of the young men and women that come through Stadium View. You can't do that. You can't teach them in the traditional mode. It just doesn't work with them. And so many of our young people have so many more issues in their lives. It's quite difficult for them to walk in and start doing reading, writing, and arithmetic. So we at Stadium View, we really emphasize the social emotional aspect, getting to know, building relationships with the kids, getting them to know more about them. Respect is a very big deal with our kids. In talking to them, we interview kids, every student that comes into our building, and one of the constant reasons for their lack of success in their minds in school is they have not been given respect. And it's sadly, oftentimes it's true. There are preconceived notions about these young people coming into schools and what they're about, and it often doesn't bode well for them.
And Joan, if I could interject, it wasn't clear in your introduction what kind of school Stadium View is.
Good point. And why don't you tell us about Stadium View? Thank you. Should have been the first question.
Viewers might not know that.
Right.
Yeah.
Good
Well,
question.
Stadium View is a secondary school, Minneapolis Secondary School. It's located in the Juvenile Detention Center, Hennepin County Juvenile Detention Center. We service young people from Hennepin County and the Hennepin County area. They're there, they're detained during their detention, waiting to either be sentenced or be released back into the community. So we could have them there for as little as 24 hours, 48 hours, or we could have them there for months at a time. As an example, a young person who's being going through adult sentencing, being attempted to be certified as an adult, they would be in our facility for a while until they're.
Is there an average amount of time then? Probably not.
Well, I would say when we last did our research, it was anywhere from 18 to 19 days for a student with non-special needs. For our special needs students, it was over 20 days.
So you really don't have a lot of time to work with the kids then?
No, and that's the important part for us. It was really important for us to initiate what we call our intervention, our transition process for our students, because we know that they'll be there for a short while, but they're either going to go into placement or going back into the community. So it's very important for us to get a handle on the young person's social emotional being, working with them, building relationships. So
that's really more important. You're almost done reading, writing, and arithmetic.
It is, because they're thinking of where am I going, what's going to happen to me. Oftentimes they're not quite sure what's happening to them at that particular point in time even. So to get them to understand and kind of settle and understand that there's school opportunities for schooling and getting support. As we said, transition starts with when students are enrolled and are detained right away. So
You know, it's interesting because you talk about transitions, and I know that's one of the things that they talked about in the criminal justice system too, is the difficulty of transitioning from prison back into society and what happens.
Yeah, yeah, and that's an issue that the Council on Crime and Justice has done a lot of work on over the years. Once somebody has a juvenile record, an adult criminal record, it can even be actually an arrest or a charge. Those records are, in many even juveniles in many cases, are public records. And so then when those youth go on to try to find housing and employment, that record comes up, and you know, the doors are going to be shut for them. And you know, I want to point out that the racial disparities here and the racial justice issues here are really important, and I think they've helped us. Well, they've allowed us as a society to think that these things impact maybe those people more, you know, especially the majority of society, but they're impacting all, you know, the majority of youth and others impacted by this are, you know, white and throughout the state, and but what we've created is a system where, you know, once somebody has served their sentence or done what they're supposed to do, it's very, very hard for them to move forward and be engaged in the community, and that just is what creates that continuing cycle.
Now, I know there was a law that was proposed. It was called Ban the Box. And now that's one of the things that could possibly help this. Is that right?
Sure. And I've in my work at the council, I've lobbied on behalf of that bill for the last 6 years.
Just to tell us what it is, though.
Well, yeah. Yes, thank you. Sometimes I forget. So the Ban the Box, what that means is to take the question about criminal records off the initial employment application. Employers can still ask about it later, and they do. But it allows somebody with a criminal or juvenile record, hopefully, to get that foot in the door, maybe get a face-to-face with somebody, and be evaluated more based on where they are at today and what they're able to contribute versus just that past. And it's not going to solve all the problems, but Minnesota in 2009 was the first state in recent history to expand that Ban the Box idea to all public employers throughout the state. And then just last year, we were able to expand that to private employers. And you know, there is on a positive note here is that there's a little bit of a shift, and those types of things are happening around the country to relook at how we handle these issues and really how we view people who have some kind of a record.
Now, you said something about juvenile records. Does that impact the young people as well?
Well, I'm sure it does somehow, some way. But again, we're in our school. It's we deal with who walks through our doors, and
but if
many of those young people are not prepared for the field of work.
So
that's one of the things
few steps before they get to the
Right,
filling
well,
out the job application.
Exactly, and the perspective I don't want to give is that all of our students are subpar. We've had some very gifted young men and women that have come through our school, and again, they struggle with this concept of school, being in a school and being part of a school that doesn't want them.
So really, what you're saying is so true, is that it's not so much about the reading and writing, it's more about their building their character, in a sense, their sense of self.
Very much so. Again, it sounds very simplistic, but respect is a very, very big deal with our young men and women, and to be disrespected in their minds really shapes their whole perspective of school and how the school feels about them. Again, we could work as a school district, a school system. We could work a little harder at attempting to keep the kids in school and working harder to provide opportunities for them that we don't necessarily do right now in our regular schools.
Well, something else that you mentioned that reminds me of that is it's sort of a yin and yang thing. People want their community to be safe, so they want a lot of policemen around. But then when there are a lot of policemen around, sometimes they start to arrest people for things that might not get them arrested if there weren't as many policemen, if you understand what I'm trying to say.
Yep. Well, and the way the Council on Crime and Justice, we have victim services programs, and we understand the importance, the victims' rights and supporting victims of crime is very important to us. But one of our ultimate aims is public safety, and if we can support people and have things in place that help them to be successful regardless of their past, then we're all going to be safer in the end because they're going to be less likely to engage in criminal behavior again.
Well, now, is that also a reason, though, why more people of color are arrested? Because there's a heavier police presence in these communities than there are some other places.
Oh, sure. Yep. A great example of that in the adult arrest area is the ACLU recently came out with a report that looked at the arrest rate for marijuana possession around the country. And marijuana is actually it's a drug that's used more prevalently in white populations between ages 18 and 25. But when you look at the disparity, nationally, an African American is 3 times more likely to be arrested for marijuana. In Minnesota, it's 7 times more likely. In Hennepin County, it's 9 times more likely. And in Minneapolis, an African American is 11 times more likely to be arrested for marijuana than a white person.
I'm thinking again of the absolute numbers of white people and people of color. And there's
right. It's a true disparity. It's not based on population percentage. So if you're, if my kid is, my kid is that much, 11 times less likely to be arrested for marijuana than, and if I was a parent of if I was African American or, adopted African American kids, I would be thinking, why is it that my child is so much more likely to be stopped for this? And you asked about, is it part of it is the policing? Yeah, I mean, this drug use is happening throughout our communities, but when it happens in the suburbs, rural areas, it's more hidden, and it's also often tends to be dealt with differently. It can be dealt with maybe through the schools might deal with it differently, families might deal with it differently, but it's not that the police presence where somebody, whether there may be some racial bias there on behalf of individual police officers, but just the fact that they're there and they're stopping people and checking for these things is a big part of what causes that.
Well,
I'm sure that must be the case with the students as well, is that...
Absolutely. I mean, as we speak, the kids are aware of these types of dynamics, and to sit and try to explain it to them is difficult because it is unfair. It isn't right, and they understand that. And when we talk about anger, when we talk about attitude, that's what creates that.
So life isn't fair is something that is absolutely true for these people.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I'd be angry too.
Yeah, I guess it goes back again to the sense of self. I mean, that must be the same case for somebody who has been arrested. Even if it just is an arrest, it still certainly must do something to your identity.
Sure.
So so what are we going to do now? We've talked about this problem. Now, what are some of the things that your organization, that the Council on Crime and Justice, is working on?
Well, so we worked a lot on the ban the box, and now we're at the legislature and we're trying to get some criminal and juvenile records expungement reform so that once these individuals have some kind of a record, it's easier for them to at some point get that sealed so it doesn't continue to be a barrier. We've also worked on the accessibility of juvenile records. Most people think that if you mess up or even do something bad, before you're 18, it's not going to follow you the rest of your life. That's not true anymore. The law has changed over the last several decades. For example, if a juvenile is charged with a felony level crime, just charged, that's a public hearing and that creates a public record when they're 16 or 17. So if you're 16 or 17, you're charged with a felony level offense, that's a public record. And that's something we've been trying to amend in state law. We did get a bill passed this last year that would limit some of the electronic access to that. We're still kind of fighting with the courts on how that's going to play out. But and again, that's something that impacts all communities. But if a youth of color has or an adult has the same criminal record as a white person, then you get the hiring disparities and the way people are viewed and the biases, and they're much less likely to be successful after that than somebody who's white. So that's one thing we're working on. We're also, and this is something that the League of Women Voters has become a great partner on, and we're working to make it so that in Minnesota, once somebody has completed their jail or prison sentence, they can vote. Currently in Minnesota, you have to wait until your entire sentence is completed, including probation or parole. Well, in Minnesota, we have a low incarceration rate, but a very high rate compared to other states of people that are convicted of a felony and put on probation for long periods.
Does this
And
mean that
can't
they, I
vote.
mean, I know that I was an election judge and they said that people have to be off paper? Does
Correct.
that mean
That's
they
the
have
law
to-
in Minnesota, and the laws vary from state to state. Some states, especially in the South, essentially, in effect, disenfranchise people from voting based on a felony conviction almost for life. And then you have Minnesota that waits until the whole sentence is done. And then you have some states that we're trying to model. There's 13 states that allow people to vote right after release from incarceration. And then Maine and Vermont never disenfranchise somebody.
can vote while you're in
You
jail.
can vote while you're in prison, and that's the same actually in all of Western Europe. That's the case. So Minnesota is kind of over here on being restrictive, and the intent when the Minnesota Constitution was written it was a little different because there were only 71 felony crimes then. Now there's 368 felony crimes and statutes. So and also if you look at just the last 30 years, especially with these increases in drug sentences and links, the percentage of Minnesotans voting age Minnesotans that can't vote now because of this has increased over 400% in the last 30 years.
Wow, and as a League of Women Voters person, we do not, that's not a good thing.
Right, right. And so, being able to vote doesn't help somebody get a job or get housing, but when we talk about this issue of being respected
That's
and
what I
being
was
part of the
thinking about.
community, this is really, it's again, kind of like ban the box. It's a paradigm shift in how we view somebody with a criminal record. If we view them more as somebody who can contribute something and they feel like they're part of the community and contribute, they're going to feel respected and they're going to be a more positive part of the community, and that's going to help to end that cycle.
It's a little hard to do that civics class about everybody should register and vote if you can't register and vote.
Right. Well, and that's a good, and this is, research has shown that if somebody's parent is more likely, if somebody's parent votes, they're more likely to vote. And so that's another thing, we've got a generational disenfranchisement and marginalization that's going on here.
So it does, and again, it's the cycle.
Right.
Well, I think another thing that they talked about in some of the stuff that I read was that it's the parents, if they are incarcerated, there's a much higher probability that their children. And
Well, but there also, if the parent is involved in their child's life, it's just as effective in a positive way. And one of the things that we really attempt to do at Stadium View is to get the parent involved and informed about the situation right away. What we were finding is that oftentimes parents weren't even aware that their daughter or son were going to school while they were incarcerated or while they were being detained. So just the fact of giving the parent immediate information, your son or daughter is going to be detained over a period of time, they'll be in school, we have a parent liaison that will be contacting you. These are the types of school programs your son and daughter is going through. This is our approach to educating your son and daughter. It's amazing how parents will respond to that. We had a parent council, and they were just as involved as the parent council in school, in regular schools that I had the pleasure of being a part of. They were just as interested about what was going on, and more often than not, they were very excited about the fact that their son and daughter, for the first time that they could remember, were actually responding well to their school experiences.
somebody who understood them.
Somebody who respected them, who understood them, who cared about them. Again, it sounds simplistic, but those are really important aspects of our young people's lives.
Well, is that part of the thing? It's not only with young people. It must be the same way with adults who feel that life isn't fair for them either, and in fact, it isn't.
Right, right. No, I think that's a very good point, and it's one of the arguments that we use in support of voting rights restoration is, if somebody's involved in the community and has that ability to vote, and then their engagement's going to, they're going to feel like they have a stake in our communities.
The voting thing is interesting because, we would feel that if somebody had, actually probably I would feel that even if they were in jail, they still didn't lose their rights as a citizen. supposedly.
Right.
So you could even vote then. But of course, that's probably a little extreme to start with. We have to start baby steps.
Well, yeah, I think it may not be possible politically, but I don't see it as extreme. And like I said, in Western Europe, that's what they do, and I think that's a problem we have as a society, both for youth and adults. Is again, we respond to things with the criminal justice system. We're very punitive versus supporting people at every possible turn. This effort to allow people to vote is really important.
Well, has this zero tolerance policy, has that made a difference too in the number of kids that get into the system?
Zero tolerance in our schools?
The fact that if you do almost anything wrong, like they said that one example that one of your reports said that somebody brought a water pistol to school and that was zero tolerance, and so they were...
Well, again, the lack of support staff in our schools to process and help that process, or to support our students through processes like that, are missing. And so it becomes punitive.
So it's easier.
Yeah, and there's less opportunities, I think, for our young people to work through that, as opposed to just cut and dry. You did this, therefore this is going to happen.
It's much easier if you just have a flat rule and that's it.
Right.
And that's probably some way the criminal justice system works for everybody.
Oh, very much so, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, and as we look forward now, so one of your big initiatives at Council on Crime and Justice is restoring the vote.
Mm-hmm.
And it sounds to me like we're working really hard on bringing kids to a place where they can respect themselves.
Respect themselves, respect others, see value in being educated. We do a lot of work with our students in writing, and it's amazing the proliferation of writing that they do, but also the calm that comes with that. They're being able to express themselves, being able to express to other people what's going on in their mind and in their lives. They're exceptional people in that school.
Well, as we come to the close here, it sounds to me like there's hope. Things have changed. We've had some changes.
Yeah, there is a change around this. I mean, part of it is due to the fact that we've so over incarcerated that a lot of people are impacted and no people are impacted, and there's a pushback for that, and there's a recognition that those responses are not the most economical. They're not a good use of taxpayer money. There's a national group called Right on Crime.
And so all of these things work together then. It sounds to me as if we've learned something tonight, that it's a circular process beginning at a very early age, something that we can all learn more about. And I hope that you have learned something tonight about what is happening, what's causing a disparity, and how we can make some inroads on that. Our guest this evening, Mark Haase from the Council on Crime and Justice, and school principal Larry Lucio from Stadium Village, and now a retired school principal. Joan Higinbotham for the League of Women Voters saying thanks for tuning in to We the People, brought to you by the League of Women Voters of Minneapolis. Good night.